today's stuff is pretty straightforward. We're going to be solving quadratic equations by taking square roots. When we solve quadratics by taking square roots, it's almost exactly the same as solving a normal equation. So again, today's stuff will be pretty straightforward. Our goal will be to use the opposite of squared to solve a quadratic with no middle term. So if you do not have your notes out yet, go ahead and get your notes out. Go ahead and take the thumbs out. So again, it's going to be fairly straightforward if you can solve an equation, which you should have gotten a lot of practice solving equations last year. Then you can do what we're doing today. So first we have to talk about our opposites. In order to solve any equation, we need to know how to perform our opposite operations. And there's two you should be really familiar with. Two pairs of opposites. And then we're going to add just one more pair of opposites today. So our first pair of opposites, I already put up there. Opposite of addition was subtraction. If I did multiplication, division is our opposite. So again, those are the pair of opposites you should be really comfortable with. Those you should be used to working with when we're working on equations. Our new opposite today is the opposite of squared. What would undo squaring something? If I have 3 squared and I get to 9, what would I have to use to get back to 3? Square root. There is our new opposite. They're undoing each other. If I square something and then I square root it, we're undoing that square. Just like if I add something and then I subtract it, we're undoing that addition. So if I have x squared and I actually put the square root symbol over it, it cancels out the little 2. If we have square root of x squared, the 2 and the square root symbol cancel out. The other thing we're going to need to consider today when we're square rooting, we've only been working with expressions when we've been square rooting stuff. Now we're going to work with an equation. And when we work with an equation, we need to consider all the answers to this expression. Chance, will you take your headphone out, please? Square root of 4. What would we say square root of 4 equals normally? 2. But let's think a little deeper. Square root of 4 is saying what number multiplied by itself 2 times is 4. What else could I use besides 2 times 2 to get a positive 4 if we're multiplying? Okay. But it has to be the same number times itself. What about negative 2 times negative 2? That is the same number multiplied by itself. So now when we consider a square root, we consider both answers. It has 2 answers, 2 and negative 2. We have to think a little more deeply about our square root. So when we write this, we don't want to write it all the way out like that. Again, mathematicians are lazy. They shortened this to be plus or minus 2. They put this new symbol to say, okay, one of these was positive, one of these was negative. I want to write this a little bit more condensed. So those are the same thing. This is just a more condensed way to write it. So that's all the new information we need today. We're ready to solve stuff. Should I see a hand or a down?
Did you see if the
Happens. I'm getting old.
Like me.
Okay, example 1. 2x squared minus 10 equals 30. Again, these are very straightforward. We're solving equations.
How many examples?
3. Hopefully we'll make it through all of them. They're pretty quick, because again, they're pretty straightforward. So we're going to do our opposites. When we're working with an equation, the equal sign splits it into two sides. And we use opposites to get rid of stuff that's next to x. If I want to get rid of the negative 10, what was my opposite?
Plus 10.
Plus 10. I heard both Carly and Hannah were both correct. So we chose to plus 10 here because it gets rid of the negative 10. But then once we choose that, we're required to also add it to the other side. That's the requirement of an equation. What you do to one side of the equal sign, you have to do to the other. So we have 2x squared still on the left. That just got brought down. We add on the other side. 30 plus 10 is 40. Still need to keep going though. How do I get rid of the 2 in front?
Divide.
Okay, I heard mostly divide, but I heard a few others. It is divide because this is 2 times x squared. So we have to do the opposite of times, which is divide. And then now we have our new opposite. What's the opposite of squared? Square root. So we get x equals plus or minus. Now square root of 20 is not a perfect square. We could simplify it. We could do our factor tree and stuff. I'm not going to have you simplify today just because we're out of time for me to show you again how to simplify. So we're just going to leave it like this. So again, pretty straightforward. You're going to be adding or subtracting, multiplying or dividing, and square root. So let's do another example. So I can do these same equations, but kind of put them in word problem format. Let's say I've given you the area of a circle, which is the formula pi r squared. And we know the information that the area is 10 centimeters squared. And we want to find what would the radius of my circle be if we knew the area was 10 centimeters squared. So the only difference between this and the last equation is we kind of have to set it up. We have to do one step of substitution, and then we're good to go. So if we know the area is 10, which letter would I replace with 10? A. Okay. We're used to replacing R almost every time, because normally they give us the radius. But this time they gave me the area. So now we're trying to solve for R. And yeah, we have pi, which makes it a little bit weird, but we still get rid of pi just the same way we got rid of 2 in our first example. If that's pi times r squared, how would I get rid of pi? Divide. Now on this one, if I did 10 divided by pi, I'd get a really weird answer. So I'm just going to leave it as 10 over pi. I'm going to leave it as a fraction, which is okay. And then we still have to get rid of squared. So how do we get rid of squared? Square root. So now if I square root this, and again, we're not going to worry about any sort of simplification, but we do have to put that new symbol in front. So what new symbol should be in front of my final answer? Plus minus. Anytime we square root now, we consider both answers because we're working with an equation now. We're almost out of time, so this last example I want to show you, but you don't have to write it down because I'm going to be rushing through it. So our last example, if x squared minus c equals 0, What does x equal? Even though we have all letters, it's still solved the same way. Add c to both sides. Square root both sides. And put plus or minus in front of your answer. So we still solve it the same way using our opposite operations.